Yeah, the crawler wild's always bringing me home. Crawler wild's always bringing me home. Crawler wild's always bringing me home.
Hello, wild ones. Welcome to another episode of the Find Your Wild podcast. I'm very excited to have Amy Bond here of Gorilla Doctors here today. How are you doing, Amy?
I'm doing well. Thanks so much for having me and wanting to share Gorilla Doctors with your audience.
Yes, I'm very excited to learn more. I haven't had any like great ape or ape experts on, so I'm very excited to learn more about gorillas and what you guys do. To start off, maybe tell me how you first got started with Gorilla Doctors.
Me personally?
Yeah.
Sure. So it's a little bit of a long story, but I'll try and keep it short.
Sure, yeah.
So when I was in the 7th grade, my teacher assigned an endangered species report for everybody, and she literally passed around a bowl filled with little pieces of paper folded up inside, and we had to pull out a piece of paper, and I just happened to pull out the mountain gorilla.
Cool.
Yeah, and then I went to the library because at this point there was no internet, so we were still books back then. Opened a book and I saw my first picture of mountain gorillas, and that was it. I was hooked.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Amazing.
So this very long, sort of winding journey. I went to grad school in animal behavior and with a focus in primate behavioral ecology and conservation, and was working on a PhD and decided to leave with my master's, and that academia wasn't going to be the route for me. I wanted to be able to talk about gorillas broadly, right?
Yeah.
And at the time in academia, the only thing that mattered were your scientific publications that maybe 3 other people read, right?
Right.
And I was like, how does that help on a broader sense? And it all matters. Like, I'm sure we'll talk about
Of course. Yeah.
But it wasn't going to be for me. So I took like a more market-based approach and went into, the sort of burgeoning movement of cause-based for-profit business type stuff. And I worked in fair trade, and I worked in all different types of nonprofits and communications and PR and stuff like that. But I was always missing my gorillas mind.
Yeah.
And so sort of after this long winding road, I had my own business for a while, working with artisans over in East Central Africa, doing ethically made hand goods and jewelry and home goods, and as an indirect way, right, of trying to sort of help gorillas, right? Like if you can ease pressure and need for resources from the forest by creating alternative livelihoods, you can, right? That's a really long-term and indirect vision.
Of course, yeah.
It brought me to Gorilla Doctors because I started donating a portion of every sale to the organization, which then prompted them over time to invite me to join the board of directors.
Oh, lovely.
So I did that. I joined the board, and I was on the board for less than a year. And this position came up as sort of like a part-time marketing communications person for Gorilla Doctors. And so I wrote out a job description, and I was like, well, this is what it could be, and I want to be the person to do it. So I stepped off the board and applied for the job. And that started, so I shifted to staff in 2019. And
wow.
Yeah. So, okay, I guess that was more long-winded than I planned. I'm sorry.
No, that's actually really beautiful. I love that. And 2 things about that speak to me is the fact that, with a lot of different people that I chat with, especially in the conservation realm, a lot of focus is trying to help the people that are closest to the animals that are in need, because in turn, like in helping people, that also, like you said, it helps like the animals in general, and they're usually so intertwined and connected that it's so important to be able to help them, because these people are just trying to survive, and having another way to make money is so important to helping animals in general. And we see that in a lot of different conservation, or at least that's a similar pattern that I see in a lot of conservation efforts as well. And I love that you donated some of the funds from your business, the artisan made business. I do that with I know we were talking beforehand, but I do that with my Femme Sauvage clothing brand too. I try to donate whatever animals on the design $5 to a charity that's doing something towards that animal. So that's like a very similar thing that we both did as well.
I love that. Yeah, and that was one of the things I loved so much about gorilla doctors in
Yeah.
choosing them to, and I mean the money I gave was minuscule, right? In the
Yeah.
grand scheme of things, but they part of our mission, a core part is a one health approach, and it's what you just said about that connection between the people and the animals and the environment that they share, right? It's kind of one health, so the health of one impacts the health of the other. And we can maybe talk about that more later if you want, but that's sort of the crux of it all, right? And so
Yeah.
you can't work in isolation in a
Right.
conservation, sort of way and think about conserving only one thing, right?
Right.
Because it's all connected and we're all connected. Even if you live halfway across the globe and are never going to see gorillas in the wild, it's still connected,
Yeah.
and that's a can be overwhelming but also incredibly empowering place from which to approach your work.
Yeah, I love that. Maybe we'll just start off with how did Gorilla Doctors get started?
Yeah, so Gorilla Doctors were a US based nonprofit organization, but all of our programmatic implementation is over in East Central Africa. We work in Rwanda, Uganda, and the Democratic Republic of Congo on the two eastern subspecies of gorillas. So the mountain gorillas and the eastern lowland gorilla or Growler's gorilla.
Got
Um,
it.
we started in the early 1980s. It was really kind of at the request of Dian Fossey, right, the famous primatologist who kind of saved mountain gorillas from the brink of extinction. And
Yeah.
she was over working in, Rwanda and was seeing gorillas being, traumatized in snares and dying unnecessarily, right,
Yeah.
of injuries and infections that could be prevented if a veterinarian were on site. So she was over in the US and she was giving a talk and she just made this sort of impassioned plea for a veterinarian to come. She's like, my gorillas are dying. They're going to be extinct by, I think it was 2020. I'm making up the year, but she was thinking at the
Yeah. Right.
time, and it was probably not even that. It was probably like 2000, right? And she's like, but I know a veterinarian can make a difference.
Mhm.
And there was a woman in the audience named Ruth Kiesling, and she was the daughter of the founder of the Morris Animal Foundation. And Ruth basically took up the charge. She
Wow.
answered Diane's plea, and the Morris Animal Foundation funded the first veterinarian to come over. And it was Dr. James Foster. It was an American, and he arrived in Rwanda in 1986, which is kind of tragic because Diane passed away in December of 1985. So she didn't
Um,
get to see her vision realized, right? And then the
yeah.
impact that it would make over the next 40 years in helping, as part of an international effort, bring mountain gorillas back from the brink of extinction.
Wow. Oh, I'm sure she's very happy on the other side, though, seeing all the beautiful work that you guys are doing. So,
So I hope
yeah.
so. We've been
Oh, wow.
tourism for a while, and we can talk about that. But
Yeah.
tourism is probably what truly saved them in the long run, right? The
Oh, wow.
economic
Yeah.
value of people wanting to come and see them, and then a huge international effort in all different areas. But veterinary medicine has been a very central um, part of that success. And in fact, mountain gorillas are now the only great ape in the wild whose numbers are increasing.
That's amazing.
It's
That's
a pretty huge
lovely.
success story in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah, and I love that tourism is such a big help because again, when tourism happens, it also affects like we were talking about, everything's affected, right? So, being able to go to these countries and being able to provide other families and other sources of income for people and to have that tourism focus is very important too.
It is, and it's sort of it's such an interesting kind of double-edged sword in a way because gorillas, we're so closely related genetically, right? We share,
Right.
90, almost 98 or more than 98% of our DNA is the same. So gorillas are highly susceptible to human diseases. And so bringing people from all over the world to see them increases the risk of transmission of disease, right? But if
Yeah.
people from all over the world weren't invested in coming to see them, right, there wouldn't be that economic reason to preserve them and their habitat. And it also, like you said, it flows over, right? So that brings money to the region, to the communities. Gorillas live in some of the most densely human populated regions of the world, right? They're in these forest islands surrounded by seas of humans.
Wow.
And so when we can bring in that money and have that sort of economic incentive for them to be good stewards, everybody benefits.
Right. And I was going to ask you too, because that, like you said, they're so closely related to us. Can they pretty much pick up any disease that we have? Are they like susceptible to like, any diseases that we can get, we can pretty much transmute back to them? Or there's some that don't always correlate?
That's a really good question. And, I'm probably going to say probably, but we don't necessarily know of, right,
Sure. Yeah.
diseases that they may or may not get or have had. We've definitely done research that shows very specific human based pathogens that they suffer from. Respiratory illness is sort of the number one cause of death in gorillas. So common cold for us can be deadly. We're always monitoring for outbreaks. They're very social animals, right? So anytime
Right.
there's an infectious disease, it spreads. But usually, like, we monitor respiratory outbreaks quite often, and you'll see it spread throughout the group. Most of the time, the gorillas recover on their own, but you see very similar parallels like you do in humans. So maybe if there's older individuals in the group, they might
Right.
have more severe respiratory infection. If there's some that are unhealthy for other reasons, right? They're more susceptible
Just,
to become,
yeah.
yeah. And so those tend to be the ones we provide supportive treatment for, to just give them that boost in recovery.
Well, oh, that's amazing. Yeah. Just give them that extra help that they need. Right.
Yeah, when it becomes really severe. So part of our mission is very much to be as hands-off as possible, and we only intervene if it's life-threatening or human caused. Right?
Right.
So those are sort of our two rules for engagement. And we have two different types of interventions. And the majority of them are not what we call partial, where we're administering medication remotely via DART.
Mm.
And then there's the sort of the more hands-on when it's really severe or life-threatening. If it's an illness or an injury, we'll DART them with anesthesia and
Right.
then treat them with a more hands-on approach. And we do all of that in the forest, right? We never remove the gorilla from the forest, and we're always working while surrounded by their family, their gorilla family.
Wow.
Yeah.
So, now I know that when I was reading up about the gorilla doctors, some of them are habituated and some of them are not. So maybe you can talk a little bit more about like maybe some of the pros and cons about that.
Great question. Yeah,
Mhm.
so habituated means they are used to the presence of humans, right? And they don't run away. So
Mhm.
Diane was very instrumental in being one of the first ones to really start habituating gorillas so that they don't run away, basically, which is what
Right.
allowed her to be close enough to observe their behavior. It's what allows us to get close enough to provide treatment. Right. So the
Mhm.
majority of the time, what we're doing are what we call routine health checks, where we're going in and we maintain a distance, we have masks, and we're doing visual assessments, right, of health parameters. So body condition, eating, is their nose runny? Are they coughing? Are they sneezing a lot? Is their belly not that full, which could indicate that they aren't eating?
Mhm.
Is there browning of the hair coat? Different sort of visual parameters that could be clinical signs of illness. Injuries
Right.
are usually more straightforward, right? There's a big wound, right? Uh,
Right.
and what we'll do is we take pictures, we monitor the condition. Is the wound healing on its own? Does it look like it's becoming infected? If a gorilla has a cough, how often are they coughing in a 1 hour period, right? Is it wet? Dry? Is it, things like that? all the same kinds of things that we feel when we're sick, right?
Right.
We don't want to get out of our nest.
Yeah.
I'm diverging. Habituated versus non-habituated. So habituated is what allows us to get close enough to do our work, right? That's what allows us to dart from a safe distance without them running away.
Right.
Unhabituated is exactly what it sounds like. They're
Sure.
truly wild, right? So they see humans, they run. What's interesting in mountain gorillas is there's a study that looks at the annual population growth rate in habituated versus unhabituated.
Mhm.
Habituated gorillas grow at an annual rate of around 4%, so positive growth. Unhabituated growth rate is a negative 0.7. So
Wow.
while being habituated actually increases the risks of, say, disease transmission or, interactions with humans, leaving the park, it actually it's this weird sort of double-edged sword, right? Because we can treat them, they're healthier and they're growing versus the ones we can't.
Wow, that's amazing. Yeah, and I guess that is really amazing to showcase what veterinary care and what gorilla doctors is helping to accomplish with boosting the species and their numbers and making sure they're healthy and as wild as possible.
Yes, and as wild as possible, exactly. So we aim to be as non-invasive as possible.
Right.
We're developed techniques for and are studying sort of health trends in the unhabituated groups and population where we can detect a lot of information around health and disease and things like that from their poop and
Yep.
and from hair and things in their night nests. And so there's a lot you can learn about sort of general health trends in a population with the unhabituated,
That's
which
great. Yeah.
equally informative.
Yeah, absolutely. Were they also were there any signs, like, did they get COVID when that happened, or were they? Yeah.
Yeah, great. It's really good question. So
Thanks.
really good question. So knock on wood, so far there has been no indication that SARS-CoV-2 has entered the population. When
That's
it
good.
happened, right, we of course were white knuckling it for quite a long time in 2020. And
Yeah.
we assumed they were susceptible. So we operated with that, and we were very lucky. The governments in the countries where we operate gave us permission to continue monitoring their health, even though everything else was shut down, right? Like tourism was shut down, movement around those countries was very limited. And anytime we had an indication of a gorilla that had a respiratory infection, we collected a fecal sample and would run screening on it for the presence of SARS-CoV-2. If we had somebody that was a gorilla that was really sick and we had to anesthetize them, we would do a nasal swab, right? Like, how we were doing that for COVID?
Yes.
We would do nasal swabs on the gorillas. And we never found a positive, we never
Oh,
had
that's great.
that.
Yeah.
We do know they can get it. So it was, I think, January of 2021 when the first captive gorilla in a zoo tested positive and showed clinical signs of illness. And again, it was, it ended up being sort of this weird silver lining of information for us working with wild
Right.
populations, because we saw very similar patterns of, most of them recovered, thank goodness, without
Right.
intervention. But there were a couple sort of, that had what they call those comorbidity factors, right? Underlying health risks that increase
Right.
severity of their disease, and they required treatment, but they all recovered,
That's
which is
good. Yeah.
huge for us to be able to see and know should it get into the population of the wild gorillas.
Right. And it's nice because you guys focus a lot, like one of your big focuses is on preventative care. So that was already in practice, right? To prevent, like being focused on preventing certain diseases or making sure that that you guys were being as healthy as possible to not transmit. Yeah.
Yeah. So in terms of prevention, it was sort of more how we were monitoring our own actions, right? So to mitigate the risk of transmission, to your point. So we would test, during the height, we were testing every time before we went into the forest. If we had the slightest bit of symptoms, even if the test came back negative, we didn't go. Masks became mandatory. Another strange silver lining of the pandemic was that all of the parks made mask wearing mandatory when in the presence of the gorillas, and they have sustained that post,
Right.
right? And that has made a huge difference in lowering the risk of transmission of human diseases to gorillas. And it's also protective of humans, right? I mean,
Yeah.
gorillas can share diseases with us as well.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, if we're that closely genetically related, it goes both ways. Um,
Right.
in fact, that's one of the things that's so valuable about gorillas too, in protecting them and monitoring them so closely, is because they kind of act as sentinels, right? So if there's a pathogen that sort of spills over from the wild and into gorillas, we're going to know about it pretty quick.
Right.
And what that allows us to do is get there fast to respond before it could potentially then spill into humans, right?
Right.
That's how you stop pandemics.
Yes. Yeah.
And hopefully, right? I mean, doesn't,
Yeah.
as we all well know, but that's the idea at the
Right.
basic level of how you slow, when something spills over, when a pathogen or infection, right?
Yeah, another way, just as an example of how we're all interconnected, especially with gorillas because they're so closely related to us. But I definitely want to hear more about the One Health approach that you guys do, because it's like you said, you're not just always like, obviously your focus is on helping the gorillas, but you guys do so much with helping the surrounding area too, which I found amazing.
Yeah, so the core tenets of our mission are life-saving veterinary care, scientific research, and we do both of that through this One Health approach. And like we talked earlier, the One Health is simply recognizing that the health of animals, people, and the environment that we all share are interconnected, right?
Mhm.
So the health of one impacts the health of all.
Right.
And so if you want to keep gorillas healthy, you have to also care about wanting to keep the people who live closest to the gorillas healthy, right?
Hmm.
And it's not just for the gorillas. People want to thrive too, and they should, right? And the
Yeah.
only way we all thrive is if we all thrive,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so we do a lot of work around training the rangers, their families, the communities around sort of basic best practice health um, actions, I guess, for lack of a better word, right?
Yeah.
So something as simple as like hand washing to reduce
Right.
the risk of, right? How to detect illness in yourself, what it means, all those different kinds of things that are just sort of empowering people to monitor their own health, right?
Right.
And then we have an employee health program where we, do screening, we do vaccinations, provide deworming, things like that, that can help sort of improve the overall health of the community, hopefully as well. Yeah.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. I love that. Helping the community in turn is helping the whole area thrive, which is and stay healthy and happy, hopefully. And I know that another big thing that you guys do is to give like rabies vaccinations to some of the dogs that are in the area too.
Yeah, so we those are usually government-led initiatives that we
Hmm.
participate in helping with, right? So
Okay,
we'll go
got
in-
it.
yeah, so we'll go into communities and we'll do rabies awareness campaigns and education and the importance of it. And then there's very often a vaccination component to that where people can bring their dogs. Um, Feral dogs can be a real problem in some of these areas, and they can get into the park, right?
Right.
The risk of things like that increases. So yeah, livestock's another one, right? With parasites, if there's the sort of those buffer areas around the edges of parks where, technically it's illegal to go into the park, but, there's I mean, if you look at pictures, you will see, small agricultural farms going right up to the park boundary, and it is a distinct line where the forest begins and, human communities end or begin, right?
Right.
There's no way you're not going to get some overlap. And
Sure.
so if cattle wander into the edge of the park and maybe they have parasites and they defecate and they leave the parasites and the gorillas pass through, they could pick up there's all these different sort of vectors of potential
Mhm.
transmission. And so, there's a lot of research and work looking at, you know, where are those environmental interfaces and human wildlife interfaces where you see the greatest risk of transmission based on the behavior of either the people, the animals, or both, right? And how
Right.
it's changing, right? Those are things that have been changing quite a lot as people move more and more into areas they may not have been historically.
Right. Right. Of course. Yeah. Um, yeah, that's an important thing to note, right? Is that they are so closely next to each other that it's important to make sure to do the scientific research to see what the crossover is there.
Yeah, and I mean we get gorillas coming out of the park too, right? I mean,
Hmm.
no offense. And and sometimes there's crops that look pretty tasty, right? You know,
Sure.
and so there's times where we've had to sort of help guide gorillas back into the forest.
Yeah. What are some of the other things that are affecting the gorillas that you guys focus on besides just the health aspect of like the respiratory or any of those other things?
Yeah. So we kind of our wheelhouse is really anything that can impact health. So, unfortunately, poaching and snares are still a
Mhm.
real problem. It's definitely declined,
Yeah.
and you're definitely not seeing the limb loss or death from snares that you did previously because there's trackers with the gorillas every single day. They're monitored every
Mhm.
single day, so there's eyes on them. If they see one with a snare, they call us and we race right up. So, um, we can get to them quickly. Um, and it's also declined because there's other groups and organizations that do snare patrols and remove them from the environment.
Amazing. Wow.
Use them,
Yeah.
and the thing that's snares are so visceral of a response for people who love wildlife. The thing to remember is that at least in the case of eastern gorillas, they're not being set to try to trap gorillas. They're being set by people who are trying to feed their families, right?
Right.
So it's for small antelope, right? And gorillas just happen to get caught in them, right? Especially the younger ones. They're curious, they're playful, you know.
Right.
So it's a tragic byproduct of the region and where they live, the density of people, and people just trying to feed their families, right? Um, Now, sometimes it's different over in West Africa. There's a kind of a more active bushmeat trade. So
Mm.
sometimes maybe gorillas are hunted specifically for that, but very different, right? So poaching and snares are still an issue. Disease definitely is the number one. Habitat loss, right? We talked about
Yeah.
that briefly, where habitat use changes that can increase the risk of both disease and snares and things like that. War or civil conflict is a pretty big risk. Recently we've seen right this in January some pretty serious civil unrest happening in the Eastern Democratic Republic of the Congo, in
Mm.
a region where that's the only place you find critically endangered eastern lowland gorillas.
Mm.
So when you get these sort of huge political, civil, right, all these things happening, gorillas can be, collateral damage, just like
Right.
all the innocent people. Uh,
Yeah.
and it had a huge impact on our ability to monitor their health, at the height of the conflict.
Yeah.
So that's some sort of ongoing challenge that's sort of always been there though in that region, right? And it's something
Right.
we sadly sort of anticipate and plan for, right? When we budget and when we think about our activities and our goals and things like that. Those are probably the biggest, and
Yeah.
I think too, as far as disease, there's a lot of sort of new and novel things that are emerging because of changes in habitat and land use and the increasing overlap in people and wildlife.
Mhm.
So, so, kind of staying at the forefront of monitoring for the emergence of new infectious diseases.
Yeah. Do you ever like I don't know if this is a thing there, but like do they use like pesticides? Do you ever see any of the gorillas getting side effects if there's any pesticides being used in some of those agricultural areas?
Yeah, great question. So, okay, so I would say anecdotally, yes, right? I can't speak to any specific data, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Right. But we have absolutely seen cases where a gorilla we know left the park, was maybe feeding in someone's crops or in an area where, a transitional space between the forest and crops and things like that, and got sick.
Yeah.
And the symptoms, were very suggestive of a type of poisoning.
Interesting. Yeah.
But I'm not sure it's a kind of high level threat.
Sure. Yeah, like maybe like one-offs here and there cuz how often do they leave, right? The forest
Yeah,
to
it's not that common, really,
right.
for what you might think. And I'm not sure, to be honest, how proactive these subsistence farmers are in using pesticides, right? Like maybe
Yeah.
how affordable they are, or
That's what I was thinking too, right? Yeah.
and the volcanic soil can be quite rich, and so can
If
last
they
a
even
long
need
time
it.
without needing kind of those amendments and things. So, um, I don't know. It's a really good question, and you're getting me to the limit of my knowledge.
No problem, no problem.
That
Yeah.
part.
Yeah, just I had a friend on recently that was talking about pesticides being used in India. And he's actually he focuses on tea. So trying to do everything in the most organic way possible, but the side effects of that. So just maybe think about the, the pesticide use. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, tea is a big crop in Uganda, and
Mm,
they and it's grown along park boundaries. And so I know there's been a lot of discussion around that and the risks of that to the gorillas. And what was I going to say about that? Um, I don't know. It'll come to me. If it needs to, it'll come back.
That's okay. No worries. I was going to ask you a little bit more about the poaching. So you said that unfortunately in the West they poach gorillas for like bushmeat.
Not just gorillas. I mean, primates and
Other,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. And there's sort of an active bushmeat trade market for different types of wildlife meat.
Wow. So that's one of the ways. What are some of the other like things that poachers like will go after gorillas for? Like do they try to take them for the wildlife trade or
Yeah. You you see a lot more of that with chimpanzees.
okay. Yeah.
Um, Gorillas are absolutely still a target. Mountain gorillas don't survive captivity.
Mhm.
Um, Western lowlands, we know they do. Um, I'm not as familiar with the illegal wildlife trade out of West Africa. Um,
Okay.
but we see, um, we definitely see it. I think it's not as great a risk with gorillas because they're monitored daily,
Right.
right? So they're very well protected.
Yeah.
But there is certainly evidence that it's not a closed system, right? That leaks can happen, and they're, we'll find them in places in the world they quote unquote don't belong
Right.
occasionally, right? but that's not something we're directly involved in. Now, what we do very often in Congo is when the government wildlife authorities will confiscate animals from the illegal wildlife trade, very often infant chimpanzees, other types of primates, monkeys, things like that, vervet monkeys.
Yeah.
They'll come to us for triage care. And then before they're sort of transported to a more permanent sanctuary. So we do see, unfortunately, quite a bit of that. And the tragic thing with, all of it really, but specifically
Yeah.
with chimpanzees, is when you go to get an infant chimpanzee, it very often results in the death of a minimum of 3 to 5 other chimpanzees
Oh,
because
wow.
they will try to protect that baby to the death. So the only way to successfully remove them, at a minimum, you're killing the mother, right?
Yeah.
But you're probably also likely killing other individuals who are attempting to protect and defend, their family.
Wow.
So the sort of ripple effect of the illegal wildlife trade is never that one individual animal.
Yeah. It's so sad. Yeah, it's just awful, like to think that, taking a little baby from its family, just to, I don't know. It's like it's this like weird thing that you see in wildlife trade, right? That it's like this weird flex, like, oh look, I have like a wild animal, but like, what is the purpose of that? Like you've caused a lot of like hurt and damage, like in the wild. So, yeah, that's so sad to hear. And the other thing I was going to ask you about that that you brought up was that that only which ones are only allowed or not allowed, sorry, which ones are the only ones that are able to survive in captivity?
Well, the Western lowland gorillas are the ones you see in zoos around the world. So for whatever reason, they are able to survive and even, breed in captivity. Mountain gorillas have never have. There was the most success has ever been with Virunga National Park maintained this Nkwekwe sanctuary for several years with 4 mountain gorillas that had been, rescued from the illegal wildlife trade or a poaching event or, other various reasons. And that, they managed to keep those mountain gorillas alive and healthy for very long time. But
Mhm.
over time, each one, and there's something about mountain gorillas that they can be fine, they can be fine, they can be fine, and then bam, they're just really sensitive. And I think so for whatever reason, right? They can't. And then with eastern lowland or growers gorillas, they're the largest of the 4 subspecies.
Mm.
And there is a sanctuary in eastern DRC called Grace, and they are the only sanctuary that has successfully sort of, they might just be the only one, period, but they are very successfully keeping I think it's 11, it's either 11 or 14 eastern
Mhm.
lowland gorillas that have been rescued from the wild and orphaned,
Wow,
and they're doing very well.
that's amazing. That must be, considering how hard it is to keep them, that must be a lot of hard work to make sure that they're healthy and thriving like that.
Yeah, they're a really great organization because they're not only are they sort of maintaining the sanctuary, but it's all Congolese led and community supported, right? So they do a
Amazing.
tremendous amount of work in engaging the community as the stewards of these animals. They're a great model for kind of balancing that space between human and gorillas, and when gorillas end up in captivity because of human behavior, how you can involve the people. And so
It's amazing.
yeah.
Yeah. Um, this is probably going to be like my favorite question I'm going to ask you, but what what do you think that like the gorillas have taught you through like your connection with them through being with gorilla doctors and uh throughout your life?
Yeah. Oh wow. So I think, yes, what I've learned from them is that, well, really, I think it's sort of lessons in how to be a better human,
Yeah.
and I think the number one thing is humility.
Mm.
When you're with them, they're allowing us into their space. And, I always had this fantasy, right? Because this started very young for me, right? So I had this fantasy that when I was going to finally show up, they were going to be like, Amy, we've been waiting for you. Come on, join us, right? And what actually happened was they could have absolutely cared less that I was there. And that's the right way for it to be. And just, right, so it's not about me. That's where the humility comes in, right? So we get so much from them, and they don't really ask for anything in return.
Yeah.
We have to kind of show up and help because of what we've done to the environment in which they live, right? But in an ideal world, they wouldn't need us.
Right.
I think we need them far more than they actually need us. And I find that profoundly humbling, if that makes any sense.
100%. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think that I mean, gorillas in particular, like you said, like they're just so closely related to us, like as kin. And, you know, I think that there's a really big reflection of them and us and them. And just like like kind of like our remaining wild, like ancestors that we can go and connect with. Um, you know, in the wild is just beautiful and amazing.
Yeah, and I think for people that might not ever have the opportunity to see them and be in their presence in the wild, we can still learn from the way they, through videos and the way they interact with one another and protect their family and just live as much as they can in harmony with their environment, right? There's so much we can learn. And I really do think the core of all of it is humility, you know.
Yeah.
And we'll give the silverbacks a little bit of a pass because, of course, they got to hustle for their females, right?
Yes.
That's sort of core to just every living thing, right? So,
Yeah.
but other than that, they're not really hustlers, right?
Yeah.
They're just kind of being, and I think there's a tremendous lesson in that.
Yeah. I think also that, sometimes, I always like to try to stay in the middle, but I feel like we just have to also respect animals as being what they are, right? Like there's just some aspects, like you said about the silverbacks that made me think of it, Um like it's just that's their nature, and we have to respect that. And I think that happens a lot of times. Like I'm a big wolf person. Wolves are probably, I would say, one of my favorite animals, but they're either, it's really sad because they're either loved or hated. And they just get there's so many myths about them that are wrong. And they do things, and then people are like, oh, see, that's evil, like they'll kill, overkill, which they don't do, but there'll be these myths about them. And just like not being able to fully accept certain aspects. And I think we can relate that a lot to us as humans, like how sometimes people are like, okay, well, I'm just not going to be sad anymore, I'm just gonna, but there is an opportunity and sadness to learn and to gain depth within ourselves, right? Like there's certain things that anger can teach us, like these negative kind of shadows side of our emotions that maybe we judge in animals, or don't appreciate in animals, or just respect them in general, or at least some people don't. But that, I think that there are really big lessons that we can learn from those aspects of animals too.
Oh, I think you're absolutely right. Especially when you're talking about the shadow and the light, right?
Yeah.
And I think we very often project our shadow onto others.
Mm-hmm.
Have to look at it in ourselves, and there's no reason we don't also do that to animals, to your point. And
Right.
but maybe the animals are acting funny because things are out of balance. right?
Right.
So there, there's that whole sort of concept of what is in one is in all. I mean, it kind
Yeah.
of goes back to One Health. Our
Yeah.
approach is more scientific than spiritual, right? But
Yeah.
it's still connected, right? And so
Yeah.
we're out of balance in our own individual selves. It's a reflection of the external balance, right? And,
Yeah.
and so maybe wolves are doing something that seems unnatural
Right.
because they're responding to something in the environment potentially being out of balance. We're getting a little bit existential here, but I guarantee you there's probably scientists out there looking at and collecting data to try to understand those types of behaviors from a scientific perspective as well, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, that's like my goal here is to try to balance both, because I think that also I don't know, like the connection with what we can see in animals and in nature, I think is so important for us to get back to our own inner wild as well, and in turn, like how we can all have a reflection of that outwardly, inwardly, to help, heal us and the planet. So yeah.
Have you read Braiding Sweetgrass?
I haven't. It's on my to read list. So
Yeah, I mean, if you want a exquisitely mind-blowing guide for connection and balance with nature, that's the book.
yeah.
Walt Kimmerer. Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely on my to read list. I've found I have a 3-year-old son, so it's been hard for me to read, but I found a very good way to I found a hack actually, and not like sponsored or anything, but I use Speechify, and I scan the book, and then, while I'm doing housework or I'm working out or something, or rocking my son to bed, I have it in my headphones and I can listen to it. So
How is that different from an audiobook?
It's not. It's just AI read. So I guess there's some books that I have that are I guess not available in audiobook. There are some that are probably like could just, I don't know if there's like a huge difference. You could probably still get the audiobook, but that's just my hack that I just
I hadn't heard
found out.
that. Speechify. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. But to bring it back to gorillas, I don't know if this is going to be the same answer if you're going to say, but like, what would you wish that people knew more about gorillas in general?
Hmm. I feel like we've covered it, so we can just
Yeah.
summarize it again. I think number one is just that close genetic relationship, right? And so our health impacts their health and vice versa. I'd say that the second one is, and I don't know if we talked about this, but we talk about gorillas as an umbrella species, right? So when we
Mhm.
protect gorillas, we're protecting the forest that they live in, and that
Mhm.
means we're protecting all the other living things that forest holds, including, and this is part of that connection thing, right? Even if you're on the opposite side of the world, those forests are like our lungs for the planet, right?
Right.
And gorillas, the Congo Basin, the forest of the Congo Basin is the second largest forest on the planet after the Amazon.
Wow,
And
I didn't know that.
yeah, and gorillas occupy a very small piece of that forest, but because of the international spotlight on gorillas, larger swaths of that forest are protected than maybe otherwise, right?
Mm.
And you
Yeah.
can think of that almost as like the planet's lungs, breathing, cleaning our air, processing carbon dioxide, and gorillas sort of help contribute to that in an indirect way, if that makes sense. At least that's
Yeah.
what I do. I mean, I'm
Yeah.
biased. I think gorillas are the answer to every problem that the world has. They're like my guru, right? So
Yeah.
I'm biased. Everybody take what I say with a grain of salt. But
I love that. Yeah, and what is like what is their role, like I guess, like what's their niche in the forest, like in their environment, that gorillas, I guess, like do or accomplish? Like do they like, I know like elephants like knock down trees and make stuff, but yeah.
that's a very good question. Uh, well, They probably create some pathways for smaller animals.
Right.
They're definitely seed dispersers, right? At certain
Mm.
times of year. Probably more eastern lowland than mountain gorillas. Mountain gorilla ranges are pretty small. They're at higher elevations, so you get fruit, but not as often. Um, those would be the two main ones I'm aware of.
Yeah. Yeah, I like, just because like I'm always, I feel like diving into wolves, but I think that gorillas are really fascinating, and so like I'm always wanting to learn more and deeper about each animal, you know? So
How
that's cool.
about wolves? What are some of their ecological?
Well, it's interesting because you said that gorillas are an umbrella species. They refer to wolves as like a keystone species. So a lot of times with just managing prey and elk, and I guess there's a debate about this, but like there's a clip out there that's like how wolves change rivers in Yellowstone, and how they manage like the elk and bison so that the river sides aren't uh overeaten, and so they help for trees to thrive so that the landscape isn't overeaten by those ungulates. So that's one of the things that they're primarily really good for in the ecosystem.
Yeah, and that's a really good distinction because keystone and umbrella are very different, right? So keystone
Right.
is suggestive of that animal is essential to the sort of ecosystem as a
Right.
whole, right? So you remove that individual and it shifts or changes or collapses the ecosystem. With gorillas, I don't ever want to find out if they were a keystone, right? Because it would mean that they were gone.
Yeah.
Um,
Right.
but as an umbrella species, it's more this broader that their presence helps protect the forest,
Yeah.
right? and maintain the forest, and everything that lives in it, right?
That's very cool.
Yeah.
What are some of the other animals, I guess, that come into like that are near gorillas? Like you said, there's like uh little deer, or what are they called?
Diker, or small antelope called diker.
Oh,
These cute,
cool.
they're like this big and they're really cute. Um, oh my gosh. In the forest. Well, there's other non-human primates. So I'll stick to mountain gorillas. And their forests, there's forest elephants, there's buffalo, there are other non-human primates like baboons and monkeys, bats, uh,
Mm.
all kinds of birds, insects.
Hi, wild ones. I hope you're enjoying this episode of the Find Your Wild podcast. This episode is sponsored by my clothing brand, Femme Sauvage, and you can find a discount code and link in the description. So check it out. We have a lot of amazing designs, and $5 of the proceeds goes to different charities. So please feel free to check it out and enjoy the rest of the episode. Thanks so much. What like I guess also, do you know like what do they typically, do they eat meat at all? No. Gorillas don't eat meat. Yeah.
Well, yeah, no. I mean, they'll get insects, right? But probably more by accident, although they'll sometimes eat ants intentionally.
Okay. Yeah.
Um, there, Diane Fossey in her book Gorillas in the Mist, so this would have been in the early 1980s, reported anecdotal evidence of possible cannibalism,
Mm,
but it was never verified. So
right.
it was sort of very sort of anecdotal. But no, they do not actively eat meat on any level.
Right. Because I think I saw something where like chimps will, yeah, will eat like, so it's so interesting to see that difference in like species, right? Because like they're also kind of related to us, but they have a more protein like like a little bit more protein focus with like the hunting of like smaller monkeys or something. Yeah,
Yeah,
like
well,
the chimps. Yeah.
they're more closely genetically related to us. They're our closest, are chimps, and then gorillas. And you do see a lot more sort of, you see the coordinated hunting You see coordinated and what seem like targeted attacks on individual chimpanzees.
Mm.
You will see different troops going to quote unquote war. I mean, you see a lot of sort of the origins of our
Right.
less than shining qualities.
Right. Right.
But I'm
Yeah.
also biased, right? Because there can be these weird, like, I'm a chimp person, I'm a gorilla person. I'm very clearly in the gorilla camp, right? And so I'm like, ooh, chimpanzees. I mean, but yeah,
Right.
I think
That's so
gorillas
funny.
are perfect, right? So
Yeah. Yeah. I think they're absolutely beautiful. I mean the silverbacks are really cool and powerful. And I guess like maybe just like one of the last questions before we go is you said there are different and we've been talking about them a little bit here and there, but there are different subspecies of these gorillas, right? Yeah.
yeah, so there's four. But before I say that, you just made when you said that about how powerful, right, and big the silverbacks
Yeah.
are. That to me is another really big one, right? True power doesn't have to be displayed, right?
Hmm.
So these guys are so big, and for the most part, they are very gentle,
Mm,
right? They
yeah.
don't have to show how powerful they are. Now, don't get me wrong, they will get in violent fights with a competing silverback over food,
Sure.
right? But I think that's something I've definitely learned, right? Like true power does not require a display.
Mm, I
Um,
love that. Yeah.
okay, so there's four subspecies. Two are on the western side of the continent of Africa. There's the western lowland gorillas and the cross river gorilla. Cross river gorillas are critically endangered. There's only about 300 individuals left.
Oh, wow.
And they were not identified as a subspecies, and I think only in like the last 20 to 25 years.
Wow.
So they're the newest. And then there's the two eastern subspecies, which is what we focus on for health, and that's the mountain gorilla, which is found in Rwanda, Uganda, and Congo, and
Mhm.
then the eastern lowland or Growers gorilla, and they're found only in eastern DR Congo.
Wow. That's amazing.
And
Yeah.
they're critically endangered, and their population has declined probably 70% in the last 20 to 25 years.
Mhm.
And the majority of them live outside of protected areas.
Oh,
So we
that's
monitor.
hard.
Yeah, it's hard, right? And they're unhabituated. So the growers gorillas or eastern lowlands that we do monitor, it's a very small number that have been
Mm.
habituated in two different parks, in Kahuzi-Biega National Park and Virunga National Park.
Wow.
Yeah.
And then just like what does it take to habituate like gorillas? You just have to be like, I don't know, like gentle in their presence or just like show up like consistently and not be harmful, I guess.
Yeah, it's consistently showing up. It can take a couple years. Um and
Sure.
and I mean, to be honest, it is stressful for them in the beginning, right? They don't know what you are. They're scared. There is some stress involved in the process. But then there seems to be a point at which all of a sudden they just stop caring that you're there and they stop
Right.
running away. It's different. So I was back in 2000. I was on a habituation project in Gabon for Western lowland gorillas, and it ultimately got abandoned because um, their ranging behavior is so different. Right? It's so much bigger in a given day that to be able to consistently find them and stay with them and keep up with them was way harder than gorillas who might only move 500 to 800 meters a day.
Right.
It's
Yeah.
it's the density of the vegetation and the accessibility of food, right? So western lowlands have to range farther looking for food than mountain gorillas.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so habituating them it is significantly harder.
Right. And then like you said it could be stressful in the beginning. So if there's not that right, that makes sense. If there's not that you're going to be able to get to a point where they're not going to care, then it's hard to put them through that stress if you're not going to be able to know where they are every day to be able to build that habituation up. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, when I was on that project, we would be out in the forest for 12 hours a day, and I,
Wow.
you know, most of the time we didn't see them. But when we did, it was usually from a distance, and they would, kind of display at us and then just run away.
Right.
There was no way to keep up with them, right? And you weren't going to chase them because that's stressful and that's
Right.
right. So, yeah, that was tough.
Yeah. At least you guys have a way of I guess like you said, there's still a way to, like, through their poop or their hair follicles, to still gain scientific knowledge and to be able to help them in that way, if you can't do that through the process of habituation.
Yeah, you can look at a sort of broader health trends. It doesn't necessarily mean you can do much about it, right?
Right.
But at least kind of having that baseline within the population is important information, right? One of the other things we can do with habituated gorillas that's super cool is we can collect saliva, and we do it completely non-invasively. Like, right, if we're watching them and they chew on a bunch of plants and then they drop it, we can go collect the plants and extract saliva from that,
Oh yeah.
which is really cool.
That
So
is cool. That's amazing.
yeah.
Awesome. One of the, I guess, like, just the last question I have for you is, for people listening, what are some things that could be helpful, that people that like gorillas that maybe can't go and visit, like, what would you say is like the biggest help?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of I hate to say money, being
Right.
what everybody says who's in a nonprofit position, right? But that is absolutely what allows us to do our work is individual donations.
Yeah.
There's $5, right? Or $100,000. It all matters. It's all important. Just to put it in context, it's about $5 to $8 a day to monitor an infant gorilla.
Wow.
So if you give $5, let's say you give $5 monthly, you're help covering the health monitoring for one infant for at least one day that month. That is not
Um,
insignificant when we're talking about only 1,000 mountain gorillas on the planet, right?
yeah.
Infancy is a dangerous time. So that's a huge deal, you know? I think in a broader sense than that, that sort of interconnectedness we talked about, the ripple effect, uh, our individual actions have collective impact, right? So like, let's say you're never going to see them, you don't live, you live halfway around the world, but you conserve water and you compost your food waste and you walk whenever you can and reduce consumption in whatever ways works for you in your life. All those things add up, right?
Yeah.
A collective ripple effect for the health of all of us and the planet that we share. And I think you just have to trust that there's not a single insignificant choice that you can make.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah, and that's like my favorite thing about, I don't know, about life, maybe, is like just our interconnectedness with everything, and just showcasing how important that is, that like just that little impact, like those little things that you said that can really uh grow and help everything, which is amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, and
Um
involved in your own community, right?
yeah,
Because it just, and in whatever way that's, kind of sparks your soul.
yeah,
Because what we need are bright souls, and we all
yeah,
have that capacity, right? So whatever that means for you and where you are in your life, do that.
yeah.
It will help
Yeah.
the gorillas.
Yeah,
I don't
and
know.
I think the one thing that I learned, I guess, through all this is like, what I think gorillas, like, what speaks to me about gorillas is their love for each other and their connectedness, right? And how closely related they are to us, and how that showcases how much we all need each other.
Oh, yeah, beautifully said. They care for one
Yeah.
another.
Yeah.
I think, the more we care for one another, the better we'll all be.
Yeah. Absolutely. Thank you so much, Amy, for coming on. Just let people know what's the best way to find gorilla doctors or connect with you guys?
Yes, thank you so much. So we're our website is gorilladoctors.org. And then we're on all the socials. So Instagram,
Yeah.
Facebook, LinkedIn, Blue Sky,
Yeah.
YouTube, and it's all at Gorilla Doctors.
Awesome. I'll make sure to link that below too, so it's easier for people to access. But I always just like people to say it too, so they can hear it as well.
Yeah. We appreciate it so much, and what a lovely conversation and thoughtful, meaningful questions. I appreciate it so much.
Thank you so much. And I really appreciate your time and chatting with me. And I really loved learning more about, gorillas and the complexities that they have to go through and what you guys are doing to help. It's truly beautiful. Yeah, and makes me appreciate them just that much more. So
That's my only mission in life.
yeah.
Every person I convert to a gorilla lover, I am doing my job.
All right. Well, I think you've definitely got me into loving gorillas too. So
That's very nice of you to say.
yeah. Thank you so much, Amy. And thank you so much, Wild Ones. We'll catch you on the next one.
Yes, thank you so much.
Bye.
Revel in the moment like a river flowing to the sea. I feel the energy of life force flowing all